Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, it's time to revisit the issue of seasonal time change. Every spring and fall, Nunavummiut join people across Canada and North America to curse and complain about the disruption caused by time change. Mr. Speaker, I can sympathize with my fellow Nunavummiut, for I believe that any justification for spring forward and fall back are either outdated or are outweighed by the serious health and economic impacts we know are associated with time change. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister is aware, a significant number of Canadian jurisdictions agree with me and are moving away from the practice of seasonal time change and adopting a year-round standard time. Mr. Speaker, when the issue was raised during our last spring sitting, the Minister indicated that he had no position on the issue. Now that the Minister has had sufficient time to consider the topic, I'm hopeful that we will see some progress. And I'm confident that my colleagues who have also been raising this issue will be pleased. I'd like to ask if the Minister can confirm today what the government's position is concerning the advisability of ending seasonal time changes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Minister of Justice, Mr. Simailak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question. The government's position right now is we do not have a position. We are currently not engaged in any discussions regarding making changes to daylight saving time in Nunavut. However, we are closely monitoring other jurisdictions in Canada that are either thinking about it or doing it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For supplementary, Mr. Lightstone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Moving on to my next line of questioning, or next question, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the Northwest Territories became the most recent jurisdiction in Canada to pass legislation to move away from seasonal time changes. And the government of Northwest Territories has passed that piece of legislation with the intent of following through once other jurisdictions also put an end to seasonal time change. Mr. Speaker, Northwest Territories has joined Yukon, British Columbia, and Ontario, as well as Saskatchewan, in moving in that direction. Mr. Speaker, the Northwest Territories has gone through a lengthy process to determine the feasibility of standard time in the territory, and has indicated that if the Northwest Territory does not decide to does decide to end seasonal time change, it will be a lengthy and complex process that will require the Northwest Territories to ensure that the greatest extent possible that all devices, applications, and operating systems in the Northwest Territories that NWT residents depend on in our daily lives will receive the necessary software updates to reflect the new time. Mr. Speaker, plainly, ending time change is not a simple matter. It is somewhat complex. It might be as easy as it might sound as easy as passing legislation to make standard time or amending regulations, but that is only the first step. There is a number of steps along the process to actually bring standard time into force. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, a number of jurisdictions and provinces and territories have passed that legislation or made amendments to the regulations to allow them to bring standard time into effect, contingent on their neighboring jurisdictions, either other provinces or states. Mr. Speaker, right now, the biggest hinge impacting standard time in Canada is the United States. And it's come to my attention that the Senate, United States Senate, has recently passed a bill to make standard time in effect in the United States. allowing states to determine whether or not they would like to practice daylight savings. Mr. Speaker, the United States is likely to implement the end of daylight savings or bring that piece of legislation into effect in the current calendar year. Mr. Speaker, if that does happen in 2023 and other provinces and jurisdictions such as Ontario, NWT, and Manitoba also make an immediate switch to end daylight savings time, how soon after would our government be in a position to follow suit? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Justice, Mr. Samailo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. How soon after would Nunavut would follow suit with other jurisdictions? Of course, that would take some time. If this became a priority, all members of the Legislative Assembly would be engaged in conversations to determine the government of Nunavut's position on daylight saving time. There would be extensive consultations in Nunavut. As the member mentioned, technological devices, airlines, Microsoft, Apple, they'd have to be dealt with as well to ensure that all of our clocks are in tune, in line with the changes. So there'd be a few different factors that would come into play if we were to follow suit with other jurisdictions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Second and final supplementary, Mr. Lightstone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response. Mr. Speaker, I'm worried that Nunavut will fall behind. Mr. Speaker, I think it is imperative that our government prepare in advance for what seems like an inevitable end to daylight saving time here in certain jurisdictions in Canada. And I think it is important that we are prepared, either through passing legislation in advance of the United States changing and creating a domino effect with our Canadian southern provinces. Mr. Speaker, I would not want to see Nunavut in that position. I would like to be assured that in the event that Ontario or NWT or any other of our close bordering neighbors decides to bring their legislation into effect, ending daylight savings time, I'd like to be reassured that our government will be able to quickly implement some sort of similar standard time. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister is well aware, a number of Canadian jurisdictions have held plebiscites or other public consultations to determine the views of their residents on this issue. And I'd like to ask if the Minister is open to undertaking such an exercise in Nunavut to determine how many Nunavummiut truly wish to see an end of daylight savings time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Justice, Mr. Samailo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question. We can definitely take a look into it and start talking about it to see if how soon we could do a review. The department is constantly observing our neighboring jurisdictions to see how far advancing they are with ending daylight savings time. So we do want to make sure we don't fall too far behind. But we can definitely discuss it within the department and start talking about it and planning for it if it should happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.